Hello, everybody.
Oversized shirts are the best.
I'd call it 5, I'd call it half 5.
Call it 5.5 feet. You're saying?
I think we've done this. We've done this podcast 4.
City physio.
Oh, yeah.
7.
You make training. I'll make emails and calls.
You're not training some?
No.
Reschedule.
No, it's one with Richie. He's been rescheduled twice. If you could let us know if you can see us and hear us, that would be absolutely great.
So you have a naturally smiley face.
I would say you have a very naturally not smiley face.
That's fair. That's very good. That's a reasonable thing to say.
Do you think I have a smiley face?
Yeah, you do kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're almost always got a person this way.
Yeah. It's just a happy person.
Whereas I think mine is kind of like, oh, is he judging me again? And I am.
Yeah.
The dirt is correct. That's if you think I am.
So they can see my massive buns just fine.
Wait, where are all your talents? Oh, you've got talents.
Yeah.
I need to go over
this. Dick says, you both kind of look naturally depressed.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think that's true. You definitely have like a default smiley face.
Yeah.
Unless you're doing work. So obviously
in which case it's like
you get your headphones in.
McSplugel is asking, do we have an in-season program for rugby? No. In-season rugby athletes tend to come to us for one-to-one coaching. Or else they run if it's just rugby athletes, they'll run an off-season program while they're in season and they'll just change their frequency. Usually running that off-season, like those blocks in particular, running those as a 2-day-a-week frequency, so you'll get 8 weeks out of every block instead of 4 weeks. That tends to work very well. Lots of people do that. People who are very, very serious, like just depending on the level they're playing at, they'll just come to us for in-season one-to-one coaching.
You are seen, you are heard, you are valid. So Aubrey Emmett, I feel like the name sounds familiar. Aubrey says, how should I think about sets, reps, and variations of rolling the classic lifts during a hypertrophy phase? Also, did you see Lou Dalin's 190 snatch from Blockies? So in terms of thinking about how do you load the Olympic lifts during your hypertrophy phase, it really depends on what you mean by hypertrophy phase. So some people will take this term very literally, and it's possible you should be taking this term literally depending on you as an athlete, whereas some people will do like hardly any Olympic lifts, and there's merit to both of these where they'll do a lot of snatch, clean and jerk, a lot of squats, deadlifts, pressing, rowing, downhill skiing. The Russians love for some reason like a GPP phase, or essentially, or this might be post GPP phase and just kind of hypertrophy. So if you are doing a very traditional hypertrophy phase and you're doing this for say 4 weeks, which I do think is very warranted in a lot of people's cases for maybe once or twice a year, if you're doing a real hardcore true to the sense hypertrophy phase for say a month, you can just practice the snatch and clean jerk once a week and do a couple of singles, very, very light, keep the loading low, like 10% of the loading is probably what you'd normally do in a kind of high volume block. So very, very low and limited. If you're doing a hypertrophy phase for longer than 4 weeks, I would probably have to up the intensity and up the frequency of the snatch clean jerk. But then I would ask, why would you be doing a hypertrophy phase for longer than a couple of weeks? So in a normal hypertrophy phase for an appropriate length of time, you can kind of just practice them, feel them out, keep them pretty light. Usually when you do a hypertrophy phase is when you're either coming back from an injury, so you're not snatch clean jerk isn't going to be in a good shape, or you've just done a big competition, so you don't need your snatch clean jerk to be in good shape. So usually hypertrophy phases precede a good performance or a peak performance. So you can afford that time where you're just like, okay, I can let the snatch clean jerk go for a few weeks.
I'm going to answer the second part of your first question. So Aubrey Emmett, question 1, part B, and talking about programming variations. Well, no, because you answered question 1 part A, and I'm answering question 1 part B. But Aubrey, in terms of like how I think about variations, and I know Owen is the same on this. I think about variations as like variations are only there to fix something. So to be honest, everyone when I start writing the program is full snatch, full clean and jerk, and there's no variation. And then through like receiving videos from them and by watching them and how they're training, then variations get added in. I don't tend to keep variations around for too long. Like I want the variation to be a tool that I apply onto something. Then once it's fixed it or it hasn't fixed it, I take it off. If it hasn't fixed it, I'll go for a different variation or a higher intensity or higher frequency of that variation, and then pull it out again and go back to just El Clasico's snatch and clean and jerk.
And is that part B finished?
So yeah, well, that's question 2 then. Did you see Lee and Lou?
This is it.
Fucking Christ.
He's an 81. But yeah, but it's incredibly impressive, obviously. But like heavy block snatches, I don't know.
Nothing.
Yeah, they don't seem to mean a whole lot. Heavy block snatches with straps from like halfway up the thigh. You know, we saw Ilya do like 205 from blocks, and he did 191 from the floor. So obviously incredibly impressive with the feet. But if we're looking at him from a competitive athlete's point of view, then you know it doesn't give us an indicator of what he can do from the floor in competition. But obviously we'll see in less than 3 weeks for the Chinese national game Leones.
The next question then, Mark A says, snatch grip versus normal grip for RDL, extra benefits for the snatch grip. To be honest, I think for 99% of people who are doing snatch grip RDLs, it's a method of doing a deficit RDL, like you're increasing the range of motion by moving your grip out, and then your torso becomes closer to the floor, so you get more range of motion, you get higher amounts of hip flexion during it. For the very, very small minority of people, and they're people whose hands might be very small, they might struggle with gripping the bar, or that angle of the wrist. So if you have a particularly wide grip in the snatch, the angle of the grip might need to be trained slightly. In terms of benefits there, they're getting a benefit just by being able to do more reps with that wider grip and kind of becoming accustomed to it. But for, as I said, 99% of people, they're using the snatch grip, or we're altering the snatch grip to get their hands out wider, get their torso down closer to the barbell and therefore closer to the floor, and training those hamstrings, glutes, and erector spinae even more in an elongated range of motion than in a standard grip RDL.
How many times a week do you recommend Nordics? So probably once, twice a week would be reasonable. So just with average frequency, like how often would you do hamstring curls, or how often would you do your belt squats, or how often would you do your single arm dumbbell press? You know, just put it in where you'd normally appropriately load things where it makes sense. So like once, twice a week would be a pretty reasonable place. But then I wouldn't see any value in doing it more often unless you have a very particular reason for that.
Just one thing on the Nordics. Sorry, I was going to answer the next question, but one thing on the Nordics you need to be really conscious of is because there's such a long eccentric phase, and because you're really training the eccentric, you do degrade that muscle tissue more than you would if you're just doing hamstring curls or RDLs or something like that. Eccentric phase is really where you need to watch your loading, because that's where all of the damage happens. You know, that's where all the main mashing up and tearing of the tendons and the tissues themselves actually happen. So do be very conscious of that you can do plenty sessions, but you need to make sure the loading is light, or you can do 1 or 2 sessions, but make sure the loading, again, isn't inhibitory to you making progress.
Scott says, did you see the new footage of Lasher breaking his snatch by lifting the approximate mass of your right quad? I did. I think isn't it the most we've seen from Lasher is the 225 kilo snatch?
I thought it was, or is there a new?
I don't think, unless there's a new one that I missed, but I'm sure we'll have heard about it. Surely, so it's 225.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Aggressive.
Yeah.
Dynamic. Iconic.
Athletic.
Iconic. Stylish. Yes, honey. Go, girl. Erica Oliviera says, kind of around the question, but do you think it's a bad idea to use bumper plates? There is a CrossFit gym in my area closing down, and they have some cheap stuff for sale. If the price is very, very cheap, then no, it's definitely not a bad idea.
Definitely a great idea.
Yeah.
There's one or two things you need to, like, I'm going to make some assumptions here, right? That the CrossFit gym you're buying them from had black, normal, Chinese-made bumper plates, and they have a metal ring in the middle. You just need to watch, firstly, that metal ring isn't moving around inside in the middle. So maybe, like, just, they could have glued them in, but just throw them on a bar and drop them, see how much movement there is around it. The other thing you need to watch for is the flexing of that metal ring in the middle. So when you put them on a bar, are you able to move that bar around? Jesus Christ. Are you able to move that bar around?
It's like, I'm bored.
Move the bar around inside in the plate.
That's not helping. Like,
yeah, nothing is helping. If there's too much freedom of movement, or if there's too much movement within the collar of that bumper plate, then they're probably worn out. The only other thing I'd look for is like small cracks around the edge. So small cracks around the edge will definitely just become a big crack at some point.
I've seen as many Alico plates break as CrossFit bumper plates.
I think those Alico plates break more, like the ones with the big metal ring that's bolted on.
Yeah.
Definitely.
No, the CrossFit bumper plates, like the 5s and 10s will break from the real old ones. But if this CrossFit gym bought them in the last 5 years, say, then they're definitely fine to buy. If they're very, very close to the price of currently for sale new bumpers, then I wouldn't. But if the price is a proportional amount lower, where you're like, this is a bargain, then I do 100% be all over them plates, like butter on pancakes or something. What people maple syrup, honey on pancakes, Nutella on pancakes. I'll be all over them.
Oh yeah,
all over them like butter.
On it like flies on shit.
Do you think about Nutella and butter on pancakes?
No. They put butter and syrup on pancakes. That's a good old mix.
That is actually.
Okay. What's the next one? Okay. Tyrone McCabe says, this is a strange one. Whenever I'm beginning to feel overtrained, my elbows get really sore. It's a normal sign I need to dial it back. Any ideas why this might happen? Look, that's just tendons and stuff will tend to get annoyed, and lighter and narrower tendons will tend to get annoyed quicker than your larger motor unit tendons will. So the example of your, like, depending on the makeup of your knee, your quadriceps tendon might get annoyed before your Achilles tendon, even though they're both putting in force during your squats. Your quadriceps tendon isn't as robust, it's not as strong as the Achilles will be. So then obviously when you're looking at the elbow, you get a lot of smaller kind of peripheral tendon units that come through, and that's why your elbow will tend to get annoyed before anything else. To be honest, what I would be looking at though is a recruitment of your arms during the lift. So a lot of time when we get elbow bends in the clean, or people who bend their elbows a lot in the snatch, anytime that elbow bend is happening and then you're going into full extension and then you're having to bend your elbow really quickly to pull yourself back in, that can be really, really negative in terms of the tissues themselves in your elbow. So it's not just terrible technique to bend your elbows during the clean. It's bad for that system itself. So that is what I would look at. I would also look at things like how often you're pressing and how often you're doing pull-ups, because that can definitely add into that overall loading on the elbows.
Honcho says, hello, dot, period. I hear people call it period.
Yeah.
Seth
very American.
Does he? I would have thought period, very American. Yeah, very American. I think Seth's called that.
What I hate is when people use it in a sentence and they say, like, bending your elbows is bad, period.
Oh yeah, that's why they say that. That's so annoying.
Whereas I prefer to say, like, bending your elbows in the clean is bad, full stop.
I like to say bending your elbows is bad, you dumb cunt. My max deadlift is 265 kilos, but my max squat is only 175 kilos. Do you know why this is? I'm 6'5", and he's 16 stone. 16 stone is 101 kilos for anyone wondering. Thanks. No period. So
you've answered your own question there.
It's just, so what this might be a case of, rather than thinking my squat is really weak, you probably should be thinking I'm just really fucking good at deadlifting in comparison. So my deadlift is just good. You're good at deadlifting, and squatting for you at 6'5". Now, normally people are like, I'm too tall to squat. They're like 5'11", I'm like, shut the fuck up, you know? 6'5" is genuinely starting to get into the rounds of things where it's kind of like, oh, that's maybe too tall.
Yeah.
Like, 6'1" is fine. 6'2" is. I feel like the closer you start getting to that 7 foot, you're just getting to the realm where squats are genuinely just a little bit harder for you, no matter what
No,
you do.
they're significantly more difficult.
It's a legitimate. Normally, people are like taller lifters and 6 foot. I don't buy it, but 6'5", I'd say probably what's the case here. You're just very limmy. You've probably a long reach, a long wingspan, whatever appropriate size torso. It's unlikely you have a very short torso, so you, or maybe who knows, but it's probably just likely that you have a decent deadlift compared to your squat, and it's just harder for you to squat. That is a big discrepancy for sure, but it's likely a morphology thing, I would say.
Yeah, I think in general with taller lifters, when you get this kind of discrepancy, they tend to be their own worst enemy. So just to give a quick example here, they'll tend to squat with their feet wider and toes out to the side. They'll tend to squat very low bar, and they'll really incline over. And that's because they have they have worse squatting mechanics, right? So it's difficult for them to squat well. And then they go to a secondary position that aren't, or they use secondary positions that aren't good, and their squat doesn't get better. So what they end up doing, and it's probably true in your case, if there's that kind of discrepancy, like a 90 kilo discrepancy between squat and deadlift, more than likely you've drastically underdeveloped your quads. And if it was me, or if I was coaching, I would be getting those feet narrower, toes pointed more straight ahead. You might only be able to squat to 3 or 4 inches above parallel, but you need to keep the knees forward the entire time, keep the knees forward on the way back up, and you'll start to get genuine development in your quads. And it's probably something that mightn't have happened at all in your athletic career up until this. But squat with high bar positions, squat to parallel or to just above it, and actually get strong legs. Don't just turn the squat into like a kind of good morning with a bit of knee bend in it.
And the next one's for you, though.
Okay.
Oliver.
Olivier. Is that right? Anyway, Olivier 883 says how to effectively combine Ollie weightlifting with professional table tennis training. Table tennis is 2 hours a day in the evening. 2 hours a day for professional training is ideal, isn't it?
Yes.
Expect something way more than that. Weightlifting could be a really good match for that, right?
He's professional.
Yeah.
Table tennis.
Weightlifting could be a really good match for that because you get short, discrete, very, very fast movements that have a high level of coordination. So when you look at training coordination, training reaction times, you can generally train reaction time quite well. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be just a reaction time drill in table tennis. And obviously foot movement comes into it. Weightlifting will help with foot movement. There are 1 or 2 points of note, though, is what I'd say. First point of note is that weightlifting is incredibly fatiguing on the central nervous system. Central nervous system fatigue will rattle your reaction time unlike anything else. So your reaction time, your ability to perceive a stimulus and then carry out a neuromuscular action to go along with that stimulus is really, really fucked up by fatigue. And it's not just fucked up by like DOMs or if you've tired legs or your lungs are tired or whatever. It's really fucked up by central nervous system fatigue. And heavy loading gives us a lot of central nervous system fatigue. Heavy training volume gives us a lot. So I would say if you are going to add in some weightlifting, maybe 2 or 3 weightlifting sessions a week, keep it to just snatch and clean and jerk. You could squat if you want, but don't go overly heavy because you will see corresponding drop. But it'd be much better than powerlifting or something like that because the central nervous system fatigue will be much lower in weightlifting.
Justin Beignet, I'm going to say Beignet or Benoit says 5 singles of snatch and clean jerk at 96%, which is very specific. In same day, too much volume at that intensity. Not to give you a broad answer, but too much is very, very subjective. And for the Kazakhstan national team select, that's enough for 1 session of 4 for the day. But for maybe an intermediate stay-at-home dad who works every day as a plumber or something, that in 1 session might be all he can manage for the month in that number of 90% plus lifts. So it really depends on who and what you are. I would say if you are not a professional weightlifter who can do that much at 96% in the same day, it would probably mean your maxes are quite low, or you're probably quite new to weightlifting, I would say, in general. So I would say it's probably fine for you because the absolute weights are probably quite low in terms of just probably what you're squatting. Like it might be like an 80 kilo snatch, 100 kilo clean and jerk, something like that. So I wouldn't say it's too much then. But, you know, if you're kind of in that mid-tier range and you're kind of doing like 120, 150, that can actually be quite detrimental because you do end up reinforcing some poorer actions and slower lifts. And maybe not getting the benefit from them. So I'd say it really depends on who and what you are. So it'd be hard to say if that's too much.
Too much. Okay, next question is from Max Bluglow.
Jesus Christ.
Lads, why can't you just have, like, Spencer Haley there, grand easy name to pronounce.
Mixplugal could be his name, though.
Mixplugal. Could gym sessions be done in a 7 on-field training days a week rugby camp, or should I just focus on recovery? This actually dovetails really nicely into the Gerf's point there, right? And how Gerf kind of started the last question. They can be done, right? 7 on-field sessions is a lot in a week. It's definitely a lot, but it depends what's within those 7 on-the-field sessions, right? That might be like contact session on Monday, team drills or whatever on Tuesday, contact session Wednesday, heavy rucking and mauling or heavy D session on Thursday, captain's run Friday, whatever. Like, it all depends what's within those pitch sessions. Your pitch sessions could just be ball handling, teamwork drills, and then some really discrete acute sprint work. Then you'd absolutely be able to fit it in, but it really does depend on what you're doing on the fields. Like, rugby sessions can go from being the easiest 45 minutes of your life to being like a 2-hour mini hell week. It really does depend what the pitch sessions look like. It also depends on how much contact you're doing in the pitch sessions, how much running volume you're doing within the pitch sessions, how much running intensity you're doing on the pitch sessions. And then lastly, it really depends on how turned on, how aroused, how sharp you have to be during each of those sessions. If you're just doing runs or whatever, you can go to the gym and work hard in the gym during the week because runs won't really matter that much. If you're doing teamwork stuff and it's a 7-day camp at the start of the season for selection, then I certainly wouldn't be going anywhere near the gym. I'd just be recovering. On the chance then that it's fairly moderate or fairly reasonable loading during those 7 sessions during the week, you can absolutely go to the gym. You just need to make sure that your gym sessions are well thought out and you're not doing anything dumb. Like, you're not maxing bench press. You're not doing loads of squats or anything stupid like that. Just nice, consistent. Don't suddenly start doing something that week that you've never done before. You'd probably get 2 or 3 good gym sessions in that 7 days.
Spencer Healy says, good day, lads. Thoughts on these hybrid athletes, quotation marks, on YouTube that seem to maintain a reasonable level of strength while competing in triathlons and such events. Ride it out or just nuts genetics? Probably a combination of both, I suppose.
Ride it out is such a derogatory term, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're also ride it out.
I would say it's just, I don't really have any thoughts on them, as in, sometimes you can ask me a question like this, it'll be something I've been thinking about for a while, so you'll be like, thoughts on using power snatching training or something, I might think about for ages, but on this particular event, I don't really have any thoughts on it. There's a new guy, is it Fergus? Is he going for a triathlon? And
he did the 500 mile and 500 pound squat in a day.
Now he wants to do a triathlon and something else.
Full length Ironman and some powerlifting total or something.
Fergus.
Fergus Crawley, I think is his name.
I see this.
He is an unbelievable athlete. Like, when you look at what he achieves, to be honest, I think he's one of the. If I'm looking at athletes in the world right now who I'm like, Jesus, that's incredibly impressive.
14-hour training weeks.
Yeah, so he.
Not that much.
In this case, right? I think they're really, really. I love watching people like that. I don't watch any kind of. Oh my God, who's beeping their horn? I don't watch any real stuff like training stuff on YouTube because we do so much of it ourselves. But in this case, I love watching this because this is something that has to be unbelievably well planned out, unbelievably well monitored and assessed as he goes through. I think they're my favorite kinds of athletes at the moment. I've kind of lost my graw for watching loads of weightlifting all the time. I like watching this stuff. Just the last bit of the question there, right? Ride it out or just nuts genetics. To be honest, without both of those things going for you, you're probably not going to be able to do the really high end stuff, you know, like there's a really good question below about genetics and talent, right? But this, let's just dovetail it into it. But you can't, people make this assumption that like, oh, that person has good genetics, so they mightn't use performance enhancing drugs. Or they might say, oh, that person was on performance enhancing drugs, so they mightn't have good genetics. In fact, it's like, oh, they have both. And like, if you don't have one of the two, you're probably not going to do too well. Like most of the time you see crazy feats like this, people are incredibly genetically gifted. They work really hard and they get some other help. Like,
yeah, you're not going to just believe your way into this.
No.
Like, if you don't have the genetics for it, it's not going to happen. I'm just watching some of these squats there and I'm trying to see squats.
Good low bar squat.
Also, just on your previous point there, you said you're sick of watching weightlifting. I wish there was more weightlifting. There hasn't been any fucking enough new weightlifting on the internet in months, not even years, maybe.
Yeah.
Where I haven't seen it. Yeah, I think it's a bit unfair to say you can't make strawberry jam out of dog shit, you know? So
yeah.
I think it's unfair just to put it down to gear. You know, what I'd always say to people is, if it's just gear, no, I'm not saying it in Spencer's case that he probably...
No, not at all. Like,
yeah, it's you just attacking him there.
I wasn't.
But, you know, what I'd always say is, if it's just gear, you know, you go do it, so champ.
Yeah.
You go give it a go and see how you do. Like, you know, when people say things like that, you know, it's like, Ailey was a great one for people who are like, oh, it was clearly all gear. Like, you're like, okay, have at it, so buddy.
Every other weightlifter is taking just as much.
Yeah, feel free to also go clean jerk 246 kilos at 105 kilo body weight. You know, it's not... Or I actually said this in one of my training vlogs recently. I was talking about just training hard, you know, how you have to want this in certain realms, you know, and people are kind of stopping. Kind of gear came up, you know, as like saying about Ilya, and people are like, no, Ilya, like the gear even helps your desire to train and stuff, and you're like,
no.
It just enhances what you already are. So if you're already a great athlete, it'll make you better.
Yeah.
And if you're just a piece of shit, then you're just going to still be a piece of shit, you know. Pat Mendes talked about this in one of his, he did that podcast that said like last year when that book was, maybe it's this year, where they were talking about the sport of steroids, you know. And Pat was like, I knew loads of lads taking gear and they couldn't snatch 100 kilos, you know. So it's more, there's more nuance to it than that. It's clearly both. Clearly the drugs are absolutely integral to performance at those levels, but it is not without all the other aspects. It's part of the columns that support that athletic performance, but it is not the sole central column that makes up everything and just makes it just perfectly easy for him to do that. You know, there's a reason no one else is doing this. What's he going to squat? 1,200 pound total and a sub 12 iron distance triathlon. So like, I'm sure no one else has done this.
No.
So there is.
I love watching that stuff. They're like genuinely impressive in my eyes. Reverbivore. That's hilarious.
What is that?
Well, like reverb, like could be anything to do with the reverberation of a wave. And so in this case, it would be audio reverberation.
You think he's some kind of music junkie?
I hope he's a music junkie. Can you define what you mean by talent versus genetics and how each manifests distinctly in an athlete's development? Talent, athletic talent, genetics, having good genetics is the exact same thing. Talent is in some way a kind of colloquial term for genetics. People often try and define them or break them up by saying you're born with genetics and talent is something you kind of acquire and you develop as you go on. Realistically, you're born with genetics and you refine your genetic profile. You define and change and alter your DNA every time you change. So people think that in some ways, if you were to bring a psychological framework onto this, that genetics would be the trait. So it's the trait you are born with, and talent would be the state you're currently existing in. So how talented you are right now, or how talented you've become. In fact, when you hear people talking about the genetics or or talent for the sport of weightlifting, it's the exact same thing. And people often get mixed up as well in the fact that they think, oh, I didn't have good genetics, like vertical diet guy, Stan Efferding. Stan Efferding is like, oh, I didn't have good genetics for what I was trying to do. I didn't have good genetics for bodybuilding and powerlifting. Stan Efferding was one of the best powerlifters in the world and was a professional bodybuilder. Therefore, his genetics are the best. Like it really is. It's this misnomer,
and it's such kind of a fuck you to people listening. Where like Stan Efferding is the most recent not most recent person, but he sticks out of my brain for some reason where he said things like that. It's not already used it, but like,
yeah, we're good.
Turn it off. Something that's happening.
No.
So my biggest pet peeve is when people say, "Oh, I didn't have good genetics, just work hard," as if to say that the other people watching or listening to this didn't themselves work hard and it's their fault that they didn't have good genetics. I'm not going to be able to play in the NBA regardless of what someone wants to say. You know.
Yeah.
In the same way that when I started squatting, I was able to squat 120 for a few reps, and sometimes people spend years not being able to get beyond the 140 kilo squat, and it's very disingenuous for me to say those people just needed to work harder. Now, it's so unfair to say that. Some people are just more genetics, and like we said, for one of these, in the same vein of being good at squatting, I also came last in a cross-country 5K, and I was training for it. Like, I did training, I did running, like, I trained like twice a week for it, I did runs, like, and I came full last, So, I'm not going to go and be like, oh, just like someone said, it's disingenuous of people to say that like I could have done it if I just worked harder. It's incredibly unlikely that the people who were 6 inches taller and had better fucking pendulum arms when their tibia and their knee and their fucking inertial coupling was happening with their fucking tibia, they were just better genetics for us, and there was unlikely a scenario where I would beat the best runners. So people seem to think, or sometimes we might think of the top athletes having the best genetics, but everything in between isn't. Like there's degrees of genetic applicability. Now, of course, you can get better things. We see people being like, we see it mostly with bodybuilders, because it's the easiest to say, oh, look where I started from. They were like, I was really skinny when I started. And they're like, they're 12 years old. And they're like, everyone's skinny when they're 12 years old.
Yeah.
Fucking dumbass.
You idiot.
Of course you're skinny when you're 12. Like, that's
useless. I was a hard gainer.
Yeah, like, it's like me being like, Jesus. It's like, never get off saying he was terrible at wrestling before he started wrestling. Of course he was. He didn't do any wrestling. Like, it's so annoying to people that saying you bad genetics, you just worked hard. And I understand why people want to say that, because it can sound like you're lessening your achievement when you say something like, oh, I also had good genetics.
Yeah.
You can have good genetics and also work hard.
Yeah.
You can do both of those things. It's like you said, you can't make strawberry jam out of dog shit, but you still have to go through the process of making strawberry jam. You still have to go through the process of doing it. Because in sports, fucking crazy thought, everyone else you're competing against also has good genetics,
Yeah.
Eddie Hall is someone else who said this, saying he didn't have good genetics, he worked hard for deadlift. You're like, no, by the fact that you won the event, by the fact that you set a world record, by the fact that you did the most of anyone else who's ever done this. Shut up and let me talk a second means you have the best genetics. By the fact, it really annoys me. It's like, by the nature of you doing this, it means those genetics that you possess are the best genetics. They're the number one genetics if you do the best. If you have a world record, your genetics therefore are the default best genetics until someone else comes along and does it. Lasha has the best genetics for snatching and jerking as a super heavyweight.
If you look at Lasha, you're like, no way does he have the best genetics, but he's the best weightlifter who's ever lived.
Yeah.
So his genetics are the best.
Yeah.
Also, just like, this is my last point on this. If you coach younger athletes, or you coach people in general, or you're around these people, don't ever fucking say, oh, you're just really naturally talented. Or if you're one of these athletes who, like Garth, if you're one of these athletes who is doing really good things in sport, don't ever be like, yeah, I'm just really lucky, I'm really naturally talented at this. You're not. Like, that same naturally talented person wouldn't have gone and trained. They wouldn't be training right now. They wouldn't be playing the sport or doing whatever they need to do to figure out they're the best person at it. Don't. Like, it's just a terrible way of thinking. Evan Lee says, I have a hard time staying over the bar in the snatch. Evan Lee is the good super total athlete.
Who's your
Yeah. Hard time staying over the bar in the snatch. I feel pretty weak when I pull under, during the pull under the knee, so the first pull. When I snatch, my legs take over too early and my bar path is loopy. Warm-up recommendations. I really like a snatch pull where you don't finish the pull, like where you just come to like 3/4 of the way up your thigh and you stay over in front of the bar. I like doing those during the snatch pull because I think they allow us to warm up our back and our glutes and our hamstrings in such a way where you're actually confident enough to stay over the bar. Like it is a confidence thing at certain points. Like Evan, you're plenty strong to do it and to hang out over that bar and keep your shoulders forward.
In some cases, what I do is pause snatches and a shitload of upper body work. So, for example, obviously Fitz knows in your case that your upper body is strong enough, Evan, but I know in a lot of people's cases their upper body is pathetic, like piss poor strength. So just need to do lots of pressing and lots of rows until the discrepancy evens itself out. Most of the time, it's a combination of not being able to and not having a strong enough upper body, or not knowing how to pull correctly, where to put your knees and your shoulders in relation to the barbell, and then also having a weak upper body in most cases.
Nicholas Larson says, when I bought the program, I didn't realize, so he bought the squat program. When I bought the squat program, I didn't realize it gave me access to the Facebook group, live stream twice a week. I feel like you should advertise that a bit more. It's huge value, to be honest. Yeah, so we try and push it on people if people are ever emailing us questions or anything. Twice a week, usually Wednesdays and Fridays or Wednesdays and Saturdays, we do a members live stream where everyone sends in their videos. There's like 500 people in the group. Everyone sends in their videos. Me and Garth do a live stream like this, but it's just to the group. And we go through it. A lot of the time they send in questions as well, just about training, what they're going to do in training.
Is it true that Telly said when you are the Illuminati weightlifting YouTube? Well, obviously for the Illuminati, we wouldn't tell you we're the Illuminati YouTube, so I can't answer that question. 905 Drummer says, in your pull program, it says for belt squats, 15 to 25% of body weight. Should I actually do them at 30 kilos? My case seems pretty light. So for most people, they're not really able to heavily load their belt squats, so we can have to write the program with that in mind. So they'd only be able to do, for example, what's in a weighted belt. Like they wouldn't have access to a proper belt squat system. However, it's also important to remember it's just an assistance exercise. You're just trying to get a little bit of kind of pump to your quads, a little bit of additional work, but it's not specifically to get a bigger or better quad development or a stronger push for your squat. It's just an assistance exercise for the deadlifts, and just get used to that kind of idea of using your quads and kind of mapping them out in your brain. But if it feels very, very light, if you can do the same sets and rep with heavier weights, then absolutely go for 95 trimmer for sure. You know, you could probably get up to 100 kilos for whatever the sets and reps are in that particular day we're talking about. So that was it.
Gunnar Kramer says, Gunnar Kramer is a legit name, isn't it? It's like a Bond villain name. Gunnar Kramer said, what's the best way to improve my snatch and clean and jerk when I have gymnastics training 5 times a week? I would say first thing you need to do is just do full snatches, full clean and jerks. Don't do variations. Don't do anything else. When you're in the gym, really concentrate on that. And then another thing would be just set aside 2 or 3 sessions a week where you can do that. I would do the same thing in each session. You might need to work on snatch doubles and triples for a long time. You can just keep going through like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 8 sets of snatch, 8 sets of clean and jerk. Wednesday, 8 sets of snatch, 8 sets of clean and jerk. Friday, 8 sets of snatch, 8 sets of clean and jerk. And just be really repeatable the entire time you're doing it. You won't even have to alter weights too much. Find weights where your technique is perfect. That might be 30, 40, 50 kilos. Do your 8 sets. Clean and jerk, it might be 50, 60, 70 kilos with perfect technique. Do your 8 sets. Come into Wednesday session. Is 40 kilos going to be there? Is it not going to be there? Am I tired? Is something going to influence me? Do I have a big gymnastic session later on so I'm not able to? So all of these things, when you're practicing, make sure you're practicing full snatches, full clean and jerks, and make sure they're technically perfect. The last point that I'd say is gymnasts tend to have certain restrictions that a lot of other athletes don't, right? So they obviously have incredible proprioception, really good work capacity, and they're strong. But what you really do need to look at for is a lot of time, because of that pulling and because of the work on the bar, on the rings, even on the horse. Is it the horse? Or the
Pommel horse.
Pommel horse. You need to, like, you're going to be internally rotated a lot, and your lats are going to be overdeveloped, which will affect your technique. So just do be conscious of that. Next thing, who will seek a send to Paris? Nobody. We're both actually banned from Paris due to an incident on the Eiffel Tower, where myself and Gareth faked the proposal to Ilya Ilin, but he didn't know we were doing it.
Yeah, it was a joke when he said no, like. But obviously, if he said yes, it wasn't a joke anymore. So I just put a poll there because I just saw you can say that. Where are we gone? Oh my god! Take over my screen. Oh my god!
Oh my god!
So next up we got. What do you think of trap bar deadlifts or primary exercise for athletes? Simple to teach, but wonder what you think of it effective for back squats or deadlifts. So there is a place for trap bar deadlifts in some athletes' programs. Trap bar deadlifts are not particularly effective at anything, but they're not really bad for anyone, if you know what I mean. So they have it has its use in the fact that it's kind of like chaotic neutral or net neutral in terms of its effectiveness. It doesn't really give you much pulling strength. It doesn't really give you any leg development or leg assistance. The main use I would probably use is some of the research that shows that if you're doing weighted jumps, trap bar weighted jumps are better in terms of like growing your active forces and the height people reach compared to a barbell directly on your back, because the jumping motion is more natural to what you have instead of resisting your upper body. So is something on you? No. So in that regard, it's probably better for jumping that really specific scenario. But in terms of for athletes doing something, it's not really that useful. It's fun for athletes to do it. It's fun for really strong athletes to come along and do like 250 kilos and they can deadlift like 180 kilos or something. You know, it's fun in that regard. But in terms of like, does it do anything compared to back squats and deadlifts? Nowhere near as useful or productive as those two. What do you think?
Trap bar deadlifts for me are just, if somebody has really restricted time and they can't squat and deadlifts, I just get them to do trap bar deadlifts. I almost never use them with athletes who have specific testing requirements. So if they're going back to a team and I know they're being tested with a trap bar deadlift, they still don't trap bar deadlift. They might trap bar deadlift once a week for 4 weeks leading up to it. It's a less effective tool than back squats for making your legs stronger, and it's a less effective tool than deadlifts for making your back stronger. Sorry, did I say legs and back there? Right. Anyway, it's just like a lukewarm training tool. It's effective if you can only train once a week. I'd still run just back squat, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they are nice in the jumping case because the jumping motion tends to be quite good, but really that's an applied science basis and not a training tool. Like very few people do weighted jumps in training. They're mostly used in scientific studies.
Samir Clarkson says, Owen, do you have a public playlist? So I don't actually use Spotify, right? But
I was going to talk about this.
I started making... You can make a playlist on Spotify, so the free version. So I actually use Deezer, but I'm just been slowly adding songs to this playlist with the camera. So it's called Talking and Fucking. I started it ages ago. Oh my God, focus. So I started this ages ago, and like last year I made a bit of it, and now recently I've added I'm gonna start adding more songs most days. So if you want to go find that, you can use it, and I'll keep updating it. So it's mostly just metal at the moment. Swallow Gojira, Rise Against, Blacktop Mojo, Rage Against the Machine, Trivium, Coheed and Gambera, bit of 3 Days Grace, bit of Terror, a bit of Mastodon, bit of Machine Head, and then there's one Sam Smith song that I have recently. So I'll update that for people. People keep asking about this. You know what really annoys me on my training vlog? Is when people are like, don't know about the music. That really annoys me. So I really appreciate people like the music, because I just have quite a diverse taste in music. Through no intention of my own. I like a lot of music. But it really annoys me when people are like, great lifting, shit music though. And you're like, buddy, go fuck yourself. Like,
Yeah.
But a lot of people do like my music, which is great.
You're the only person in the world using Deezer, so if you do go across to Spotify, hundreds of people will lose their jobs.
So
the only person I've ever met who uses it.
But the problem with using Spotify is I have to like get it used to me with that playlist thing.
Yeah, but that's okay, like. I know it's scary. It changed. It's scary. You don't need to explain that to me, like.
Deezer flow thing is very good. It does prompt a lot of good music. There you go.
Right. Have you ever heard Paul Brady? Have you ever heard a case of epididymitis? Just before we answer this question, I haven't heard of it. And for the rest of the stream, we don't do injury questions, but we will answer this question. I haven't ever heard of it. Here's a chronic case and can't lift heavy for a while now. Really just looking for some encouragement that it will burn itself out over time. I don't know what it is, so I can't really talk to it. Do you know what it is, guys?
Google says it's a tube at the back of the testicles becomes swollen and painful. This is a wrong live stream.
Yeah, but we just don't do any injury questions. And this might be an injury thing, this might be a health thing, but we can't really help you out. We'll say almost all injuries get better. We'll be back in no time.
Brad Burns says, would you consider making a YouTube playlist for live streams and training vlogs? You keep them unlisted for the algo, but then you can find them. We do need to make a playlist. We do need to organize the video better for sure.
Okay. Jamil Kaura. I'm a boxer and in combat sports. Kettlebells have completely replaced the barbell for Olympic weightlifter moves. Is there a disadvantage to the following that trend? Yes.
Fucking combat sports is so dumb shit.
So people just have such a warped view over what's good and what's bad.
But I love in combat sports, they're trying to do really unique, you know?
Yeah, no, it's just completely changed it now.
Functional movements, functional.
Right. What happens with kettlebells? Right, we can talk about it. The Olympic weightlifting movements, when you're using them for sport, are training aggressive opening of the hips and knees and sometimes the ankles. Kettlebells train aggressive movement of the hips and opening of the hips, but in almost all cases are an inferior movement for athletic development. So if we just compare normal kettlebell swings, even kettlebell swings to eye level, and we compare that to a power clean, what do we get from the kettlebell? So we get a strong concentric phase where we're driving that kettlebell up. We're braced and in a good position, and we swing that and we resist the swinging movement to a certain extent, although most of us don't resist it at all, really. We have some sort of eccentric loading. We have no amortization phase. We just get this tiny little turnaround in the bottom, and then we swing it up again. And we get that apparent activation of a posterior chain. And we assume, because I'm aggressively doing it and it's athletic and it's flowing and it's moving well and I'm fast when I'm doing it, that that's the same thing as a power clean or whatever Olympic weightlifting movement you want to put in there. There are so many differences between these two movements. Not that kettlebells don't work, and in certain cases, kettlebells work very well, like if you want to get better at swinging a kettlebell, but they're just not the same thing at all. And I definitely say, like, if you're on our combat sports program, don't change it out. And most of the issues we see with fighters and we see with grappling athletes in particular is we see this rolled forward lack of movement, which obviously leads to not only a deficit in their ability to perform their sport, but it also gives us longer term issues down the road where we have terrible posture. We have lacks of range of motion where people can't raise shoulders over their head, where people can't do full range of motion pull-ups or anything like that. And kettlebells make all of that worse because we're internally rotating our shoulders and really activating lats and pulling our lats down. So that's about as deep as I'm going to go on that. We could go for another hour on why they're not the same thing. But yeah.
One of the main things you can do aside the gym to improve holy performance in the gym? Sleeping.
Sleeping is really good.
Merrick What's a realistic overhead press bodyweight multiple for a natural athlete if you do everything right compared to get it takes 10 years? 1.2 would be very close to the top end of what a natural athlete would probably have to achieve and would be very, very impressive and definitely achievable by a lot of moderately strong, moderate genetic Joes.
Yeah, I think 1.2 is an incredibly good one.
Yeah.
I think for the vast majority of normal people at a 1 times body weight, strict press it's good. Like you're a good strict presser by the time you get there. But 1.2 is probably what I consider very good.
If Owen can snatch balance with 90, I can. And clean 170. I can clean with 90. He shows you a snatch balance from the front rack at least 170. Time to start squat jerking. Polka, what kind of logic is that?
Wait, what the fuck?
I hope this is a joke.
That's a joke.
I recognize I recognize the picture, the profile name, so I hope this is a joke.
This has to be a joke.
I've missed a jerk this year. What the fuck?
Also, you can jerk 190. You could jerk 190 like fucking 7 years ago or something. Baby Garth could jerk 190 from the blocks.
Do you think there's a place for pause only mesocycle, macrocycle type of training for powerlifters? And what could be the possible drawbacks be? I don't want to answer the specifics of this question first. I want to answer the metaphysical, existential question that you're asking here, John.
I'll answer the specifics.
You answer specifics. My problem, most people's problems with training is they try to make things very simple and they try to make things very the samey and very consistent. People just want to do just like they want to. It's hard for them to think out a training block and think out a training plan where there's moving parts and there's a lot of variables. So I would question, John, why would you do this? A lot of people, and you see it so much where people are like, can I just do 5x5 3 times a week? You know, because it's hard because things might go wrong. You need to know what you're doing and where you're going, and then you need to kind of push yourself to adapt to further things. So in terms of like, do you think there's a place for insert X, Y, and Z type of meso macro cycle? I would just look at why do you want to train like that? And is it because you truly think this is the best thing for your lifting? Or, John, do you think this is because you're in a bit of a rut with training or you're not sure what it is you should be doing a training? So you're like, okay, I can kind of do this for training and this will put me in a place where I'll make gains and it'll be easy to follow. That's what I might think of that, John.
John, in terms of the specifics of this, right? Pause only mesocycle or pause only macrocycle for powerlifters. Why might you use it? Pause only, in my case, I'd never just go to a pause only anything. It's like when we talked about snatches and clean and jerks earlier. The derivatives are there as a tool to fix things. And in the case of the pause squat, it's there as a tool to fix something. Obviously, there's a lot of crashy squatters out there. There's a lot of squatters who lack depth. There's a number of reasons we might use the pause squat. Even in that case where you might be a chronic high squatter or you might be a chronic crashy squatter at the same time, paused only cycles are just going to really limit you. Like, so the weight isn't as good. The tempo and the movement you're using with the lift isn't as good. Your long-term progression to get to heavier weights won't be as good. You just need to use these things as tools that you put in. You bring them in for 3 or 4 weeks, fix something. In the case of powerlifting, or in the case of a morphological change, you might bring them in for 6 to 8 weeks, or you might bring them in for 2 or 3 months. But you just bring it in when you need to, and then take it out and go back to normal training. Like, it'd be like if you're an electrician and you have a load of tools at your disposal. Like, no, today I'm going to wire the house with only a hammer. Like, you could probably wire the house with only a hammer. You could bang away the insulation off the wires and then cut them with the little hook on the back of your hammer, and then you could smash a hole in the wall and put a socket in there with only your hammer. But it's clearly not the best way. That's not the fastest way. But the hammer then is really useful for some jobs.
Where are we going?
Tix says, other than changing my squats to use more quads.
Belt squats.
What do you guys recommend as I do as an assistance exercise to get them bigger?
Belt squats. Belt squats.
Belt squats.
If you can get a good belt squat system, belt squats are the #1 quad exercise.
You can buy a belt squat, or sorry, you can buy a dip belt on Amazon for like €20. Go and get that. Stand on 2 concrete blocks either side and lash a load of weights in there. Do sets of 10, 15, 20 reps and get jacked.
I've bullied at least 3 of my lifters in the last 3 months to get belt squats. The little teeny tiny quads.
You have a little teeny tiny legs.
Hi guys, I'm a new but huge fan. Great, thanks, AJ. Can you talk about lifts and lifters and weight gain? Last year's I think 10 kilos heavier than he's 2019 world.
219 worlds.
And he looked much stronger.
That's just 2,000 years old.
And how does weight gain matter? So weight gain essentially is just more muscle mass, more contractile tissue, more tissue that does the actual work. That's like the bare bones of it. That's what I write down to its boiling point is more weight will inevitably need more muscle tissue to do more work. That's more or less what it is for most sports. Weightlifting is a little bit different because you need to be able to still maintain position. So if you get too big, you may alter positions, but if you can carry the weight appropriately, just more muscle mass, and that's more work. And that's the long and the short of it.
Albu Pavel says, is the one-to-one coaching €200 a year or for a training block? And also, why does powerlift? Okay, first thing, it's €200 a month, every month. So it's just, you get your programs on a weekly basis. It's €200 a month. It's more like a coaching retainer than it is buying a block off us. And the coaching one-to-one requires a lot of input from you, and it requires a lot of input from us. So it's €200 a month. That's what it is. Also, why does the powerlifting program have a picture of a dumbbell row? Powerlifting, it doesn't. Most people can read who used the website, so the pictures don't really matter.
Powerlifters do dumbbell rows.
Yeah.
How do I recognize an Olympic bar in a commercial gym? So first look for a brand that you recognize, I suppose. Then you need to be looking at, do the collars spin appropriately? So when you push them, do they spin faster, freely for an extended period of time? Then look, does it feel the same size in your hand as opposed to other bars? So sometimes you might get bars that can be up to 32 mils. Ideally, to be 28 mils. And then just look at the weight of the side. Usually, it'll say like 20 kilo bar. And that is as good as you can get, unless you get a specific branded bar.
Abu Sali says, heavy push press and clean and jerk in the same session. Yes, if the push presses are after the clean and jerk. Yeah. So I think that'll be all right. Thoughts on Ensons? No there?
Never heard of it.
No idea what that is. Sebastian Whitten says, hi lads, diet related question. How important are Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Estrogenic plastics, etc. Is it worth trying to avoid in a training context, or is there no influence on athletic performance? I would say you should, it's better to not have them in your system than to have them, would be the way I would answer that. So I'd never be like, no, you should get some of like the EPAs and DPAs into your body. But I would say it's probably not, you're probably not going to notice this to influence your athletic performance. But by and by, I would still say, if you can avoid them, don't have them in your body, essentially is what I would say to that, because there's literally no reason for them to be there, and there's probably some negatives. So if you made enough, like, is it the phthalates, so that affects the distance of your taint, so your asshole from your scrotum. So basically that distance is affected in the dams. If she has too many phthalates, the mother's blood system during pregnancy can affect the development of the male and the female sexual organs later in life. So just for general, I wouldn't, ideally you would have no plastics in your blood system, but it's quite hard to avoid them.
In terms of athletic performance, it's nothing. You'll never ever notice it, but it's probably bad for your health.
Yeah.
But like, we're all drinking from plastic bottles here.
That's what you just sauna.
Okay. Gavin Tobin says, elite GA players have super aerobic capacity, achieving scores of 2,400 meters on the yo-yo intermittent rec test. I'm getting 1,500 meters. How do I get a bit closer to these high standards? Can you lads help? Yeah, we could definitely just help you and coach you. But we'll now give you the back of the napkin explanation of how to increase aerobic capacity. Depending on the testing category you're looking at, in this case, you're looking at a yo-yo, the first thing you need to look at is, can you achieve the requisite speed that you need to? So if you're going to be tested in multiple bouts of whatever, if it's a 5 kilometer, so let's just say it's a 5K test you're going to be doing, can I run for 1 kilometer? If you need a 15-minute 5K, can I run for 1 kilometer in 3 minutes? If you can't do 1 kilometer in 3 minutes, you then need to say, can I do 500 meters in a minute and a half? If you can't do that, then you have to say, whatever. Can I do, I don't know, whatever the distribution of that will be. So it's the first thing you need to look at is you need to look at what kind of speed do I need to move at to achieve this? Most of the time, you're going to be able to move at that speed, right? It's going to be the prolonged effort over multiple bouts and still being able to achieve that. So if you've achieved part A, you now go on to part B. What does part B look like? Part B looks like your triangle of training specificity. There's just a slightly different training triangle for the training specificity of aerobic capacity, and it starts with low intensity running multiple times per week for sessions lasting longer than 20 minutes. So when you're looking at this, building an aerobic base, most of the time people make the mistake of they go immediately into interval training. They go immediately into sport-specific work, whereas in reality, that's not what's needed. You need a long time on a stationary bike, a long time on a rowing machine, or a long time in a low-impact running environment. So that's running on a field, running on a track, a surface that will allow you to run there. You need to be just doing in moderate loads, moderate intensities, but your volume must start off by being quite high or building in that initial cycle to being quite high. What you do then once you've achieved a prerequisite, and that's something we talk about all the time with people we coach, is what's the prerequisite for aerobic capacity going to be? Once you start achieving those kind of values, so that value might be 30 kilometers of pitch running per week. That value might be a 5 kilometer run at this pace multiple times per week. That whatever that is, it's going to be a longer duration piece, and I build my foundation there. Once I've achieved that, that stuff stays at the bottom, right? And we stack on top of that, where you're probably at now, is aerobic capacity interval work. So I'd never get rid of the foundational work. The foundational work stays there, but my time I spend on it, the capital I give that becomes much, much lower. I just keep it there to ensure it doesn't drop off completely. And now I start with the addition. I take most of my blocks of concentration away from that, and I start putting those into higher intensity interval pieces, higher intensity medium term pieces, and I start working much, much harder on this. So the main thing you'll notice is the intensity of the running, the intensity of the rowing, the intensity of the cycling will have increased fairly specifically. And now we're doing these in multiple sessions, multiple heavy efforts within those sessions. When we start to figure this bit out, then the last bit that gets added up on top is my sport-specific or my test-specific training. So in this case, if it was test-specific training for a yo-yo test, we start looking at the length of the yo-yo test, the duration of the yo-yo test, how many bouts we want to be able to do in a row, and the specific recovery we have between them. If it was a sports-specific piece, we'd look at the position you play in that sport, the duration of your high-intensity piece in that sport, how long you're going to be able to recover during the game, how long you'll have to recover during sessions within the week. So that's a brief kind of back of the napkin thing of how you'll get up to a high level of aerobic capacity.
Only 13 of 110 people, one of them being you, can squat 200 kilos.
No.
At the moment, in the deadlifts, only 36% of people can deadlift 200 kilos. Lads, I would say whatever your question is, whatever the answer, whatever your specific question is,
squat more.
If you could squat and deadlift more, it'll probably make your life a lot easier. Whatever your athletic ever be, whether that be weightlifting or badminton or your aerobic events and if you can just do a 200 kilo squat and 200 kilo deadlifts, it would make everything a lot easier.
2 seconds there. Just on the last point from the last question of the aerobic capacity work, somebody said try an 8-week program. Belay type research shows it's really good. I wouldn't start. That's not where I'd start there. I just wouldn't.
I'll just put the squat program in case anyone needs help with their squat. I'm also going to put the deadlift program in just in case anyone's concerned for their deadlifts.
Elective Throw says, hello, Kings. Looking forward to seeing you in Edinburgh. We're looking forward to seeing you in Edinburgh. I think that it just sold out today. Been doing weightlifting in preparation. That's good. Would you say that using heavy med balls could be used to improve tendon and other tissue strength? Yeah, it definitely can. When you look at tendon strength, ligament strength, those kind of integral joints, tissues, most of the time where you start with is isometric work. So a lot of the time we think for tendons, we need to be doing these explosive movements, utilizing the stretch shortening cycle. A lot of the time with tendons, we need to be looking at the isometrics, making the stability really, really good within those joints. Then we look at heavily weighted eccentrics, and then we look at the more explosive, the stretch shortening cycle stuff, the plyometric stuff. So they definitely can be a good place, but it's probably not where to start. Bench favorite, bench accessory favorite.
You know, it's just benching is really good for benching in general.
Really high frequency benching.
Yeah, benching is like that. So if you said squats, you say things like belt squats or rows, for example, would be great for your squat. But for benching in general, just more benching is the best accessory, unless get to as much as you can handle and build into it, and then build back a little bit, build up again. Benching just is super specific, just like strict pressing, any kind of pressing. Just more pressing is in general the best accessory for that. So whatever time you have and adaptation energy and resource capital to do for your benching, I would just look at, can you do more benching later in the week or more pressing? Even a different variation of pressing can use me, like, I don't know, dumbbell benching or something like that. Pressing just responds incredibly well to pressing. Other things do too, but to a certain extent. But pressing itself, just that's the first thing that comes to our mind there when you said bench accessory, and it'd be more benching. So it's a funny one. It's not a sarcastic answer. Honestly, just more benching would be how I'd look at the next 3 assistant exercises you do before you get something different, probably.
If somebody's playing a drinking game there where they took a drink every time you said press, they'd be fucking locked.
Bench.
And piggybacking Gareth's point, bench frequency is really the main driver of bench press. If I was to give you a bit of probably the answer you're looking for, close grip bench press is where you do the majority of your training with the bench. Very, very little of your bench training should be made up of wide grip competition style bench. So close grip bench, or just in front of the shoulders, is what we refer to it. So that width. That's the first thing. And then I really like plate press. So holding a bumper plate between your hands coming down. So I think a lot of the time on people's benches, their elbows flare out. And I like that plate press for that. Right. The heat death is coming.
The death of the universe.
What's that?
Eventually all the atoms will stop vibrating, essentially. The universe will just stop.
Go cold.
And start contracting again.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Says, my tendons and ligaments are always more sore than my muscles. What should I do? What should he do there?
I would say trust your training load.
I'd say your training load is terrible. Hopefully you're not on one of our programs. But in that case as well, is like, if you're pretty sure your training load looks right, you look at your warm up and your cool down. It's very, very likely. Also, depending on your level of experience, tendons take longer to adapt. So a lot of new lifters, like, they're really enthusiastic about getting into training, and they really want to go and lift heavy weights right now, and they want to squat every day and do all this stuff. In reality, your tendons, like your muscles, will adapt super quickly. Like, getting someone to get bigger muscles is the easiest thing in the world. It's why bodybuilders oftentimes mightn't be the best people to talk about strength training, because it's really, really easy. Hypertrophy is a simple system. There's nothing complicated to it. But tendon adaptation, it takes much, much longer.
The Joe's question there.
Johan. How would a rock climber, boulderer, more like sprinting than a long distance runner, with a session load of 8 to 10 hours per week, 3 to 4 sessions per week, incorporate weighted pull-ups without overtraining? So the first thing I'd look at, Joe, is we're obviously looking at bringing in weighted pull-ups because this is a deficit in your training. And a lot of times when we have deficits in our training, it's because the actual structures aren't really there. So to bring an example across the squatting, if we have somebody who's like, how can I suddenly start squatting more during the week? A lot of the time it's like they have weak quads and their weightlifting coach told them they need a bigger squat, or they can see it in their own technique they need a bigger squat. And the problem in the case of that is that your knees are going to get sore because you're bad at squatting. You're bad at squatting because your knees are sore. Like it's this weak system, and then not enough effort put into it, and then you can't put enough effort into it because the system is weak. It's a bit of a catch-22. In your case, if you want to bring in weight and pull-ups, I'd say frequency for weight and pull-ups around 2 to 3 sessions a week is absolutely maximal. You'll see some sort of increase if you just went with 1 session a week. I would keep it away from more important, higher intensity sessions of climbing. So if you climb with a coach or climb with a team or climb with another group where you tend to go higher intensity levels of climbing, more volume on the wall, whatever it is, keep it away from that, keep it further away from that. The other thing you need to look at is like, am I doing it at the correct time? So if you do 3 or 4 sessions a week, you could be doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. In that case, just do it on Tuesdays and Thursdays when you have a bit of time off. Keep your volume pretty low at the start. 5 by 5 is absolutely sufficient, and keep the weight low at the start as well.
I thought Vegan Gains got banned from YouTube. Did I see a Greg Success YouTube headline?
Did you?
I'm not Vegan Gains.
No, I mean,
did
you see it?
Oh yeah, I saw I didn't actually watch the video. I assume that's not him. It'd be incredibly surprising.
What really annoys me at the moment is they're doing like, he got banned, and it's more plates, more dates, and it looks like he got banned, but he's after getting banned off TikTok or something.
Yeah.
Like, go away.
Yeah.
Says the 2 lads making clickbait for a living.
We don't make clickbait, to be fair.
No.
Mainly we ask injury questions. We can't do injury questions, unfortunately.
Where's that?
I'd be so surprised if that is the real Vegan Gains. But there's a tick, but I feel like that tick, it doesn't look like the normal tick. I'm perplexed.
I can't see it.
Sorry, babe. I need to.
Get my second pair of glasses.
Is it time to?
Yeah, I'd say it's time to start. Vegan Gains. I wouldn't. That is Vegan Gains, I'd say. Anyway, pick out a nice question there.
You run the squat and press cycle concurrently. Can you do day 2 of each? You sure?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't. Vegan. If it is you, is it Richard's name? If it actually is you, we don't do injury questions because we just not really our area of expertise. He said he's tore his abductor. So tearing your abductor is an incredibly strange one to happen in general. So go see a good physio and look at whatever rehab they give you. But then I would be looking at what did you do tearing that in your actual endeavors, whatever you're doing in the gym after. I would be very concerned before you would start increasing the loading on your training again. I would really take a good look at what's wrong with the movements and why you ended up tearing your adductor during your high bar squats, because that is, even if this is Vegan Gains, you know, if you did tear a adductor doing high bar squats, that's very unusual. I actually don't think I've ever heard of anyone tearing their adductor doing high bar squats.
No,
I've heard of people
I get a really twingy adductor. During
yeah, but
squats sometimes.
Coming back to training.
Yeah.
I've heard of people injuring their adductors doing really wide low bar squats, but you shouldn't really be in a position where your adductors are being so exposed in a high bar squat. So I would just have a look at how, I hate to say it out loud, but look at how your technique looks in that. It sounds like that's probably an issue, or you had a particularly poor technique, or you were doing something that was very fatiguing for your adductor, and then the high bar just kind of exposed that issue, but it was something building up over time. That's what I'd imagine it was. It was something slowly happening over a period of time. So I'd say once you've recovered, then I would say have a good look at what's happening.
Okay, are we going to cherry pick?
Yeah.
Easy Money Golf says, what are your favorite primers for the snatch?
This is the second time in a month or a week I've heard this.
Right. My favorite primer for a snatch is 5 to 10 minutes on an exercise bike, followed by some air squats, some push-ups, possibly some bent over rows, and then some RDLs with a barbell. Then I start doing a warm-up for a snatch. and then I snatch my working sets. That's it. If you want to talk about actual primers, possibly some caffeine, a high quality of sleep the night before, and not feeling overly fatigued from the week's training, but priming things and primers. Yeah, we were talking about this earlier on in the week, but
That's the weirdest second time that came up.
yeah,
I understand why people would, I suppose.
like primers are just warm ups.
Yeah.
You do 5 sets at 40 kilos and then go on and do some sets at 70 kilos. Like that's, yeah. Do you have one?
I think that's kind of it. There's lots of good questions, but I feel like my brain has run out of juice.
Yeah.
I need to go train it.
Okay. Thanks very much for watching. It's been great. We'll talk to you all soon. This video will be unlisted for a while, and then we'll throw it up as usual, as you all know.
Actually, you can just list this after.
Okay. This will be live.
Yeah.